Rocket Recovery is a podcast and community for those who suffer from addictive, selfish sexual behavior. If you can remember anything from our time together, think on this. You are not alone. There are many of us who have suffered and have found a solution that works. We now live happy, joyous, and free lives. We know that this may feel completely unattainable for you right now, but be assured, peace and serenity can be found in this life for you too. Rocket Recovery seeks to demystify recovery. There are simple steps to take, but a hard path to follow. We'll support you with principles, maxims, mantras to sustain you on your journey. We'll introduce you to those who will guide you. And remember, you are not alone. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Rocket Recovery podcast. On this episode number 4, we will be joined by a recovered sex addict as a guest host. His name is Josh, and I have known him for about 3 years. Excellent, wonderful guy, amazing heart. Really looking forward to having you meet him today. Stay tuned. Warning. Because of the sensitive nature of the topics covered on this podcast, we ask you to please listen responsibly. Hi, everyone. Welcome. This is Zach, and I have a very special guest with me here today.
Hey, everyone.
This is Josh. I've known Josh for 3 years now, 2.5, 3 years. Early pandemic.
Yeah. I think it was mid 2020.
Really?
Yeah.
Maybe we could talk a little bit about the effects of the pandemic and how that's exacerbated or helped motivate you onto the problem, made you realize, oh, wow, my life in concentrated form is not going the way that I want it to go, right?
Yeah, I have a piece in my story that was definitely affected by COVID.
Wow.
It was honestly the main reason that you and I ended up meeting.
There we go.
We will get to that.
Cool. Very good. So today's episode is going to be special. Josh is my first guest host on the podcast. Really excited for him to join. And so we're going to take a little bit different structure to it. It's not going to be free form, just me talking. There's going to be basically 3 segments to this episode. We're going to do a little story time with Josh, kind of turn over the podcast to him and allow him to tell his story. And the format that anonymous 12-step programs use whenever someone gives a share like this is to offer up, this is my life before recovery. This is who I had become. This is me in all of my addict glory. This is what happened. This is the things that I needed to do and the demons that I needed to face. I needed to go into the deep, dark cave and defeat Grendel, if you will, in order to come out on the other side. And so coming out on the other side is that third part of it. So tell us what you were like, who you had become, what happened, and then who you are now, the way that you're living your life, happy, joyous, and free, still struggling. And I give you full permission to be real and authentic and vulnerable. It's you and me talking. We're not necessarily talking to the world. They just happen to peek into the conversation, but this is just between you and me. I really am excited to hear this. If you don't mind, share with me again. You were telling me before we started recording, this is your first time sharing your story publicly.
I've shared pieces of it as I've been in recovery groups. I've shared pieces of it along the way with people who I felt like would benefit, and a lot of times being vulnerable and sharing my story has been a way to help someone else come out of their shame,
Yeah.
and just promote community, openness. But as far as telling my story with any length of sobriety, with a before and an after, this is my first time officially sharing, what happened, where I've come, and who I was, and what happened along the way. So I really appreciate the opportunity.
Awesome, man. Well, take it away. I'm going to try to interrupt on a very minimal level and allow you to kind of stay on track here. We don't want to allow it to balloon out of control, but I don't want you to feel inhibited in any way in going as long as you feel you need to. Okay?
Awesome.
Cool. And that means the timer that I just started doesn't mean that you have to hit it. It's turned over.
Gotcha.
You don't see what's going on. This is just for me to find out, okay?
Right on.
All right, cool. Take it away, man.
All right. So I actually had some pretty crazy realizations, even as I was writing down some thoughts about where I've been. In the past, I've pretty much accepted that my addiction started, around age 10 or 11, I think was my first introduction to pornography. But in taking some notes and just some things I've learned about recovery and addiction, I think it really started a lot earlier than that. As early as age like 4 or 5, I had some things happen that started a mental obsession with nudity, with things sexual in nature. The first encounter that I remember, my parents let me spend the night over at the neighbor's house. I was friends with their son. Again, I would have been, 4 or 5, maybe 5 or 6, right across the street. So it wasn't a big deal. They had, the other parents' numbers. They could come get me. It wasn't like there was this out of control situation.
Right. For all outside, observations and everything, this is just a normal neighbor,
right?
Good people type of house. Yeah.
And their daughter, who was about the same age as me and the son, within a year or so, I remember distinctly her flashing me and her brother. And that was my first real exposure to, like, whoa, like, I just saw yours, like, this is what's going on here.
Right.
Oddly enough, same house, different family.
Sure. And for those that aren't like familiar with the euphemisms that we use to hide the vulnerability and everything, what do you mean by flashing?
She basically pulled down her pants and showed me her genitals.
Really? And she was how old?
Probably about the same age, 6, maybe.
Really?
7. Yeah. Another neighbor, same house. Again, she was probably 7 or 8. Talked very openly about sex, and I'm not sure if she'd engaged in it in that age, but I remember, that was really the first time I'd even heard about it. And it was just
as a second grader.
Yeah, not even. I was probably.
She was a second grader. You were in like kindergarten.
Yeah.
Talking about this stuff.
Right.
Wow.
And it started that mental obsession, which, as I have.
Yeah, if you could move the mic closer to your mouth, that'd be great. There we go. If you need to take some time and tighten it up, we can edit this out. It's okay. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. As I've learned in recovery, half of the battle, really most of the battle, starts with the mental obsession. And so from age 5 or 6 on, I had this like all these questions, this intense desire to find out more, experience whatever she was talking about.
It awoke something in you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so for, probably the next 3 or 4 years, it was just this churning. Like every time I would walk by a magazine rack in the store, I'd just be like fixated on the covers.
Yeah.
To the point where, like, we had an old house when we moved, and it had like keyholes. So I would look through the keyhole at my older sister, and I remember actually getting caught doing that. And so immediately there was just this mix of fascination, intense feelings inside, but also shame. Like, I shouldn't be doing this.
Sure.
And it just...
You grew up in a good home.
Right.
I mean, it wasn't like just a free-for-all type of situation. And so you kind of feel like you have to sneak around a little bit, because it's just like...
Right.
In the back of your head, you know that what you're doing is naughty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
good or bad, we don't know at that age, but it's like, I probably shouldn't be doing this.
Right. And I knew enough to like run away from the door, but she figured out what I was doing.
Yeah.
And so it was just this shame, this like, I can't tell anyone like what's really going on inside.
Right.
And that is the root of addiction, is isolation and shame.
Yeah.
That's where it really starts taking off. Going through school, I went to a small Christian school, but I mean, honestly, a lot of that was just, you learned how to lie better. Everyone did all the same stuff as in public school. It was just, you didn't talk about it. But, guys would talk about different movies they'd seen, or, one of the kids brought a magazine to school one time. And then my dad got a computer for the first time.
Yeah.
And that was it, man. I figured out early on how to cover my tracks and how to find what I wanted to see. Even before that, riding up to, the local drugstore on my bike and like going through and looking at magazines in the store and getting to the point where I didn't care if anyone else was like coming down the aisle. And I'd be sitting there looking at like the Sports Illustrated swimsuit, and like this middle-aged woman comes down and is like, what are you doing? I didn't care.
Yeah. I'm looking at the boobies.
Yeah. I mean,
duh.
And so,
what else would a kid my age be doing?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, your parents know you're here.
Hopefully not.
Yeah. So, once I found porn on the internet, it really took off quickly.
Yeah.
I remember multiple times, like, basically manipulating my siblings to leave the room so that I could indulge. I remember one time Mom even coming downstairs, and I like quickly minimized it, but there's this tab at the bottom that's just flashing orange, and I'm like praying that oh gosh, don't look at that,
Right.
And so I never got caught looking at porn, which didn't help. So it's just this constant like shame, guilt.
Yeah. Now, what do you mean by that didn't help, that you weren't caught? Talk to me about that. What benefit would there have been for you in getting caught?
So I think the best way I can answer that question is about sharing the next part of my story.
Fine. Okay.
As I got deeper into the addiction, this fantasy world, wanting to see and experience what I was seeing in the videos, probably one of the darkest, most shameful parts of my story is that when I was 12 years old, I molested my younger sister.
Yeah.
And that went on for a period of about 3 years, on and off. And after that period of time, she finally had the courage to come forward with it to my mom and dad. And the amount of relief that I felt, even though I was caught, I knew it wouldn't happen again.
Yeah.
I hated what I was doing. I knew it was wrong. I knew it was like the most disgusting, shameful thing, but I couldn't stop. And when she had the courage to step up and say, no, like this is not right. You know, I can't even imagine like what her life was like during those years, what she felt. You know, her brother, who was supposed to be protecting her, was taking advantage of her.
Yeah.
And yeah, I couldn't stop. And so when she told my parents, the guilt left, because now like I'm not holding in the secret.
Yeah.
But I also knew that like now I had external restriction. I couldn't do it anymore.
You didn't have to bear the burden of stopping yourself.
Right.
Anymore.
Because if it's up to me, like I'm doing it.
Right. You're a kid. You don't know how to, you're learning at that period of time of development how to self-regulate yourself. Right. And you've already proven that you really can't. And so to have an outside influence to help you with that, I'm sure was beneficial.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that I glossed over that I think is important in recognizing how I started down the road as an addict. You know, it happens. Nothing happens in a vacuum. You know, right. There's other pieces of our story. At that school, I was the odd man out. You know, we got there partway through second grade. Mm-hmm. Everyone else had been there since church nursery. Everyone made fun of me. Like I was in a class of like 6 or 7. Class ahead of me was the same thing. So when I say everyone, it was like I had 0 friends.
A very small school
right.
You're going to. You also are not. You probably weren't part of that community either. I mean, your family is mixed race, right? That had something to do with it. I remember when we had talked before.
Yeah, there were a few surface racial digs. I mean, it was nothing that
it wasn't confined to race.
Right.
In other
words, it was like, oh, hey,
or reduced to
you
race.
Have a Native American background. We'll pick on that, as well as the fact that you pick your nose and you wear the same colors to school every. You know, it was like
right. Hand-me-down clothes.
Right. Exactly.
Shoes that are never new. I mean, all the crazy things that kids pick on other kids for. Yeah.
Right. So the acting out, the addiction. You know, you mentioned not being able to self-regulate actually was my method of self-regulating.
Yeah. And at this point, if you've listened to previous episodes, you remember that the addiction is the best solution that you could come up with at the time
until it's not.
Until it's not. Yeah. Until it becomes like, oh, it's become its own problem now.
Yep.
Shit.
So I think it's important to recognize what contributed to it, because it's a critical part of overcoming it. Yeah. I think. So, you know, I didn't have my first girlfriend until I was like 20.
Yeah.
And so I think the reason that porn became my flavor of sexual addiction is because that's what I experienced. You know, I didn't have to try to find girls. I didn't have to deal with relationships. It was my own private little fix. So again, I think it was important for me to recognize why it took root in the way that it did. But even then, knowing all of that, you know, it didn't give me the answer. You know, I can look inside all I want. I can look at the past reasons, and all it really does is give you context. It doesn't give you the true solution.
Yeah. The big book talks about that.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, where it's just like knowledge will only get you so far. Self-knowledge will only get you so far. I mean, as great as therapy and working with a sex addiction therapist, somebody that specializes in that, I mean, without actually taking action against and actually dealing with the root problem and the actual behavior and going through a process of changing that behavior, you're going around in circles. At least that's been my experience. Is that similar to yours?
Yeah. I think finding more information is helpful. It's a piece, but it's only a small part of the entire journey.
Yeah.
It's like it can kind of give you a roadmap, but you still have to walk it.
Yeah. You're a whole person.
The hard work comes outside of therapy sessions.
Yeah. You're a whole person. The addiction has invaded and, contaminated the whole person. And so the solution has to involve the whole person as well. It can't just be regulated to lying on the couch and talking about your feelings. There's so much more that needs to be done in addition to that type of work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So my first experience with trying to stop, at the time I was looking at porn and masturbating, multiple times a day. Like, yeah. I don't remember ever going more than like a day. Like, I thought if I could hit 3 days, then I would be magically better. Yeah. So, I immediately entered this like white knuckle. If I can just stop for a period of time, then I'll be better.
Right.
No idea that, anything about addiction or what it was like.
Right. And there is no magic number. It's just like, there's communities out there that talk about 90 days because, it takes that amount of time to establish a new habit or whatever. But, if you're truly an addict and everything, it's not merely a habit. This is like a lifestyle type of a thing. And it's not a wholesale change needs to take place. And time plays a factor, but it's not the primary factor. It's not 3 days, a month, 90 days, or whatever.
Right. And time can make it easier, but that short circuit in our brains that goes from I have this problem to acting out as my answer will always be there.
Right.
It gets easier to not go down that path, but it's always there.
Yeah.
So I got to college, and there was a group of guys there who, essentially it was like the real life version of the NoFap community. It's like, let's just try to go for a month.
Yeah.
Or
that's awesome that you had friends like that.
Yeah, it was kind of, it was odd at first to talk about it because
sure.
It's not a group activity.
Right.
It's like I've always done this by myself. I haven't talked to anyone about it. Like, what business have you asking me?
It's amazing that somebody thought of doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, of course I was like, sure, I'll give it a shot. Never made it a month. That was, yeah, I tried. So then there were other guys that I ran into in a job that I had who were pretty open about it, and it's like, we'd check in on each other, and I never really took it as seriously as what I should have. I didn't realize how serious it was.
Right.
So when I got married is when it really started, kind of up in the ante of consequences and guilt. Because before that it was just me. But once I was married, I had her to think about, her feelings and emotions, and I never hid my acting out from her. It was always something that as it happened, I would feel guilty and I would confess. And for the first, probably 6 months, she was very understanding and compassionate and gracious. But I could tell it kept taking a harder and harder hit on her emotionally. She has always kind of struggled with depression, but this took it to a whole new level. It's like, you know, I was supposed to be her safe place. I was supposed to be her protector, and I wasn't. You know, I kept basically taking the vows that I made to her and being like, yeah, those don't matter.
Yeah.
And so that went on for probably almost 2 years, and she was finally like you have to talk to someone. Like we can't keep going through this. And at the time, the only people I knew to talk to was the people at our church. And I was really, really resistant to that because of where I grew up, how I grew up.
Yeah.
I knew what the pastors were going to say. You know, I'd heard that all before. I could tell myself the answers. You know, it was like, you need to pray more, or you don't love God enough, or just stop. And it was like, you know, they looked at a physical, emotional, spiritual problem and tried to deal with it on a purely spiritual level. Like, I would almost venture to say a faux spiritual level.
Yeah.
Because there was no real relationship spiritually. It was just like, you just don't pray enough. If you prayed more, you would be fixed.
Shaming you.
Right.
Yeah.
And so...
explicitly or implicitly.
Right.
It's like, you just need to pray more. What does that mean?
Yeah.
I pray once a week. So I pray twice a week and magically it works. What if I pray, you know, every single day, 3 times a day, you know, religiously? You know,
Right.
Oh, I need to do it 5 times and that's the magic number. Yeah, it's tough when you're given those kinds of directives like that. And it doesn't have to be like from a spiritual leader like that. It could be any type of, you know, singular type of just like the whole Bob Newhart thing. Just stop.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, those are your problems? You just need to stop doing those things.
Or, you know, I've come across in recovery guys who essentially turn step work or meetings or phone calls into like a numbers game. It's like, well, if you're still acting out, you need to make more phone calls.
Yeah.
You know, that's the same thing as you need to pray more.
Yep.
Or,
yeah,
you know, it's like all these things are good, but they're not the solution in and of themselves. And that's what was, you know,
right.
That's what I'd heard all growing up. So
Yeah.
I finally, I sucked it up, went and talked to one of the pastors, and oddly enough, they were starting a series called the Conquer series.
Okay.
They decided to kind of roll it out to the church and offer it to all the small groups if the men wanted to go through it as a small group.
And what is the Conquer series?
So the Conquer series is a 5-week or a 5 session introduction on porn addiction, sex addiction.
Huh.
It was my first exposure to seeing my little secret sin as more than just I'm a moral failure.
Yeah. I can identify with that feeling. Yeah.
And so,
like, I haven't measured up. I'm not good
right,
enough.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's like, you just don't want it bad enough. And it's like, I don't think you understand how badly I want it.
Right.
Like, this is, it's internal, mental, spiritual, emotional torture.
Yeah.
Of like, I want to stop this and I don't know why I keep doing it.
Yeah.
And so again, it was like, hey, there's a different way to look at this. There's more going on here. There's more in your brain that's happening. And so that combined with going through it with my small group, it was my first real community. Like, not just checking in on whether or not we had masturbated or looked at porn.
Right.
It was like, hey man, these are some of the thoughts that I had today, or these are some of the things that I did in the past. I think that was the first time that I told a group of men about the things that happened with my sister growing up.
Yeah.
and to feel, almost like a forgiveness or a grace that was extended. It's like, there was I believe there's someone else in the group that had something similar happen in their family. And it was, I don't know. It's like the whole thing, like I'm not alone. I'm not the only one.
Yeah. That's really beautiful.
It was powerful. I mean,
Yeah.
the community aspect of it is something that will be a recurring theme through my story. So, learning about addiction, learning about how to fight. If I wait till I get in the moment, like, I'm always going to choose acting out.
Right.
And so learning that, like, I have to start looking way up the road for markers and for, maybe I have to, like, look at other areas of my life besides just my addiction. And that was a concept that I leaned into a lot more fully as I kept walking down the path of recovery. I think it was the first time that I questioned the idea that I could just do an action and be healed. They had a bit of information that the recovery process is a 2 to 5 year journey. And so it was like, you mean I can't just stay sober for 90 days and be fixed? Like,
right.
What am I supposed to do this 2 to 5 years? Like, like I said, it was a brief introduction. In my mind, like, I would finish the Conquer series and I'd be fixed.
Right.
It's like, no, that was 5 weeks. You got like 5 years ahead of you.
Yeah. You're like, okay, so there's something different about a real solution versus a Band-Aid that
Right.
you're putting on this, huge gaping wound.
Yeah.
It's like, it put it in perspective.
Yeah.
It put the problem in perspective. And okay.
So from that point, I started meeting with a mentor once a week, who was one of the pastors at my church. And I started going to a group called Route 1520. And so both
Route 1520 is
it's a
recovery group.
Yeah, it's a spiritually based recovery group for sex and porn.
Accountability.
Addiction.
Cool. Okay.
Yeah. So we would meet once a week. We were going through Patrick Carnes's Gentle Path through the 12 Steps. And so some of the work that he has in there, some of the step one work was writing down the different ways that I was powerless. So, like, writing those down and, again, sharing it in a group. There was a lot of power there. There was just this community, again, that I'm not alone. I don't have to fight all this alone. I have guys around me who have been there, who understand, and who accept me anyway.
Because they themselves have been through it too.
Right. And so, like, that was really my first. I say extended. It was. I had 5 months of sobriety, which for me up till that point was like unheard of.
Yeah.
So then COVID happened. And all the structure and the community that I built it went away. For me, that was the main thing that changed. My job didn't really change. I just because of the nature of my work, I wasn't really affected. So the main thing was my recovery group, and like, I resisted the change. I was resentful towards how it was handled. I was resistant to trying to adapt to Zoom because that's how the group kept meeting. I did try a few times, but it just there were some real, like, roadblocks to me participating in a Zoom group.
Yeah.
It wasn't just my internal resistance to it, but I think my internal resistance and resentment played the biggest part. And so I kind of started spiraling. I mean, it was, back into every 2 to 6 weeks, I'd relapse again, have to tell my wife, she'd be wrecked emotionally again. And so finally I was just like, whatever it takes, I just got to get out of my comfort zone and find something in person. It's like, it's not getting better me being mad at the world for not conforming to my structure or how I want things to be scheduled. Like, I have to figure out how to make a change.
Yeah.
And so the only group that was meeting in person was SAA.
And SAA is, no, I'm
Sex
joking.
Addicts Anonymous.
I'm joking. We've talked about what SAA is. This is a 12-step program.
Yeah.
For sex addicts specifically. Got
Correct. So I showed up, went out of my comfort zone, had a brief intro to more Zoom groups, or the invitation to do recovery via Zoom, and got chewed out and got pissed off and almost didn't come back. But I decided to give it another shot in person, and I did. And that was the start of about a year or so of going to 2 meetings a week in SAA.
In addition to a lot of other stuff that you're doing in the meantime.
Yeah.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, full-time job, wife, 3 kids. I mean, it was a lot going on.
Going to meetings.
Yep.
Working your program of recovery.
Yep.
So what was the difference between, I mean, you went to a church Conquer group. You met with individual pastor accountability, this 15-20 group, and then SAA and everything. Have you been to any other groups? How's that path continued for you?
Those are the only groups that I've been to, and I would say after going to all of them and experiencing the differences, the similarities, my perspective is there's really nothing special about any one group or book. For me, it was about surrendering to the process, being open and committed to living in community.
Yeah.
So going to SAA for me was just a step in surrender. Like, I can't control the situations. I have to adapt. I have to get out of my comfort zone and meet new people, be open about my addiction again. And so, yeah, I mean, there were, I think the main difference from in the SAA group and the 15-20 group is the amount of phone calls. Really, I think was the main difference.
And phone calls to other guys that are in the program.
Correct.
Accountability, encouragement, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Basically, kind of the format, we would do some readings out of the big book or out of the 24 hours.
Which is a supplemental devotional type of a thing.
Or the 12 and 12, and then just share it. So, I mean, pre-recovery, if given a choice to be eaten by a T-Rex or make a phone call, like, I was going with the T-Rex every time.
It's crazy how just picking up a phone and everything can be the most nerve-wracking thing in the world.
Right.
For
And then
people.
You throw the shame and isolation of recovery and not wanting to be open on top of that. And it's like, I'm never.
Well, I know the
making
topic
phone
of this
calls.
conversation is going to be my recovery and my sex addiction and
Yeah.
possibly how I've let myself down. And, I've had these goals and I'm not achieving them. And,
Right.
it
So
just kind of piles up on top
Let
of
me
you.
call this random dude that I just met and talk about what exactly?
Wow.
So
yeah.
the readings really helped give a format to, I could read and in about 2 minutes have shared the thoughts that stuck out from my readings. Yeah. And I could hang up. That's it. I didn't have to do anything more or have the in-depth conversation. But what it did for me was break down that barrier of unwillingness to reach out. In a sense, I got used to just grabbing the phone and calling a guy. If I was driving, I'd be making a call.
Right.
And so a couple times in recovery or in trying to fight a relapse, it ended up being an impulsiveness of just grabbing my phone and calling a guy. I think
You formed a new habit.
yeah, CSATs, I think, would call it like a fire drill, where you basically just program these steps into your head. Like, if I'm struggling, I'm going to make a call. I make a call even when I'm not struggling, so I'm in the habit of making calls.
Right. It's not that big of a deal.
Right, exactly.
When your life is on the line, so to speak, picking up the phone and dialing somebody is not it's not in and of itself a hurdle for you to jump.
Right.
Yeah.
So that period of time with the community that I had was my second roughly 5 months of sobriety. And so I think at that point we ended up moving, and I changed up my routine again somewhat. And I finally decided that I was just going to like get rid of all browsers off my phone. It was like a big step for me. I felt like I should for a while. I had different, Covenant Eyes or Accountable to You, or all these different apps, and it was like there's always loopholes. There was always backdoors, ways around stuff.
Some sort of a physical measure to keep you from going and seeking out your acting out material. It's the same thing as like, I can't drive anymore because the first thing I'll do when I get in the car in the driver's seat is to go to the liquor store or go visit my dealer or whatever.
It doesn't, that's not a fail safe. I mean, if I wanted to go get porn, I could go do it right now, but it's a roadblock. It's not, I'm not an alcoholic walking around with a liquor bottle in my pocket and trying to stay sober. I mean, that's essentially what I was doing.
Yeah. By keeping the browsers on your phone, et cetera. Yeah.
And so this is where I think, for me, the story gets the most interesting and the most like, I don't really understand what's happening, but it's all happening. So I got rid of my browser, found a loophole, my guard was down, ended up having the worst like acting out binge that I'd had in years. I go to group, my 1520 group, and in group, one of the prompts was like, what's something that you'd like to bring to the light? And it was like this just weighing on me. It's like, okay, I know I got to do this. So I shared with the guys, I've relapsed again. This one was like pretty extended and pretty bad. I got home knowing that I was going to have to come clean to my wife. And she, when I got home, she asked to talk to me and asked for 6 days of separation before I'd even told her.
Wow.
So I wasn't really sure, like, basically she had just been kind of spiraling with depression, and she had met with her therapist that day, and the therapist was like we're not making any progress, like things are getting bad, like something has to change. And so we had a meeting set up with one of the pastors at our church, the therapist, one of my recovery guides, and so that meeting was already set, and it was 6 days away. So the therapist was like, maybe you should separate for 6 days and just take some time and clear your head. Saying this to my wife. And so my wife asked for that, and it was like this wake-up call of like, in the past, my wife's been really gracious, and she can't do it anymore.
Wow.
It's not that she didn't want to. It's like she couldn't. Physically, emotionally, spiritually, she was done.
Yeah.
And so at that meeting the following week, she read me a letter that was asking for 6 weeks of separation, and basically spelling out that she had no intention of getting back together. It was in a sense, I felt blindsided, because it was like, I've been honest this whole time. I haven't like lied or hidden it. And so, I mean, yeah, that's all good, but like she can't deal with it anymore. It's like if I were a drug addict and, shot up and became violent, I'm honest about it, but I'm still hurting the people around me when I'm violent.
Right. Whether you hit them or not.
Right. Exactly.
It's the threat of it.
And so it's like, it doesn't matter the steps I'm taking or that I'm being honest or anything else. Like, that's good. Don't get me wrong, but it doesn't change the fact that I'm drowning her emotionally. And so, after I got that letter, I went on a 2-day camping, hiking trip to kind of clear my head. And she and the kids went out to Missouri. So I was alone in our old house because we still had it at the time. We hadn't sold it. And I was flooded with memories from that house, being with my family, acting out in that house. There's one point where like I was looking through the window, watching them playing outside to make sure that she didn't come in to find me acting out. It's like, so I would have enough time. And so like these memories were just haunting me as I was in this place, like all alone. I went through about a week of that. So we've been separated for a total of about 2 weeks at this point. And I broke down. I had felt like physically sick for basically that entire 2 weeks. Just going through the day at work, like so wrecked emotionally at the thought of like losing my wife and family. Like all I could do was just stop sometimes through the day and just start journaling. Like I had to write down my feelings because I couldn't hold them in. I felt like I was going to vomit for almost a month straight by the time it was all over. And I mean, I had prayed like earlier that week, but for some reason the night that I experienced what I guess, if you want to call it being rocketed to the fourth dimension or, whatever, I had nothing else. My whole life I had used porn to deal with pain. Now I didn't have that because I blocked, all internet access on my phone.
I didn't have left alone with your pain.
Yeah, I didn't have music because that was one of the apps that I'd gotten rid of on my phone. And music has always been a huge part of my life and again, a way to deal with pain. I didn't have my family. They were in Missouri. I didn't feel physically able to be around any friends. I had nothing. And I remember crying out to God in that moment for his presence, for comfort that I felt like could only come from him. And immediately, like I was on the floor, like sobbing guttural wails. Like I don't even think you can call it crying. Yeah. I mean, just agony emotionally. And as soon as those words left my mouth, like I hear my phone ding. And I go look at it, and my wife had texted me, and she said, I know we agreed basically to not really send messages like this during this time. It was like all nuts and bolts about the kids. Like that's it. That's all, she needed her space. She's like, but I know how hard this is for me. I can't imagine how hard it must be for you being alone right now.
Oh, man.
And that she was praying for me. And then she sent me a YouTube link, which oddly enough played through my text messages. without like giving me access to YouTube. So it was kind of like this best of both worlds thing. But it was a song that had been really meaningful to her. Also during this time, like literally within 5 minutes of praying that, my brother called, and another brother in recovery texted just some encouragement. So, I mean, it was like a very tangible answer to the prayer.
Yeah.
So I'm sitting there in the room and I'm listening to this song play. And some of the... I'm trying to remember the lyrics to it. But basically... man. Bear with me a second.
It's all right. We can edit this out.
Yeah, the lyrics of it. I was there when you looked up into the night, looking far beyond the stars and asking why. I know you thought you were alone when you fell into the unknown. All the while, my love, you were a child of mine. I was with you when you couldn't hear my voice. I was hurting when you didn't have a choice. It felt like ashes in the rain. I saw you strong, you bore the pain. All the while, my love, you were a child of mine. Let me wipe your tears away. Let me turn your night to day. When your world comes crashing down, let me wipe your tears away. I know that songs are pretty emotional and that they're unique for people and individual circumstances. So, like, I don't expect other people to have the same experience I had with this song. But when I heard that, it was literally like God was reaching back through time to that 8, 9, 10-year-old boy who had no one. And it was like, I was there. Like, I saw you when you were alone. I didn't make the right choices in that time. But it was like, that was okay. God is big enough to use everything, my mistakes, my sin, the things that separate me from the people around me, that hurt the people around me, to show love and redemption. I think the miracle of salvation is that it uses our own brokenness, our own death, as a means to life.
And salvation meaning Christian spirituality.
Christian spirituality.
Yeah.
And or just, yes, that specifically for me.
Yeah.
But in the broader scope of the world, using terrible things to bring life. Whether it's being in a car accident and then, because you're incapacitated, finding that niche that just rockets you to success, or, all kinds of brokenness that somehow brings life on the other side. Like that is redemption.
Yeah. Death and rebirth.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that night just basically, like, I got nothing. Like, I've reached my rock bottom. I have no power. I can't change any of this. And then experiencing the most intense feeling of joy and contentment, just like I can't, I don't have words for it. Like, I was one minute I was just on the floor sobbing and groaning and like feeling like I couldn't stand up to shouting and dancing around the room. And it was like I could see God using everything that had happened to me in the past, everything. I didn't know what would happen in the future. It was like none of those things were answered, but like I was there with him in that moment.
You were present. That's amazing.
And so it ended up being about, I don't know, almost a month that my wife and I were separated. And kind of like my mindset during that time was like, I don't know how much time I have left with her, but I have at least 6 weeks to serve her, unconditionally, whatever she needs, whatever the kids need. And that's it. That's all I know for sure is I have 6 weeks. So yeah. That was kind of my mindset during that time. And at about the month mark, she asked me to come home. March 24th was the day that she asked for separation. It's also the date of my sobriety. So it's been almost 10 months now. And I think something I've pondered, just with the order of events, deciding to get rid of all access to the internet on my phone, confessing to the group the relapse, the ask for separation. I don't view that as a consequence so much as I view it as a mercy. It was like, I hear your prayer to be healed. I know you don't have what it takes on your own, but I see your willingness. And so here are these events that are difficult. They weren't easy. Yeah. But they're for your good. They're a mercy. It means that you no longer have to continue acting out. Yeah. So my recovery journey since that time, I go to a meeting a week. I still go to Route 1520. I have met with a recovery guide now for about a year. I've got guys from all the groups that I've been to that I still call on a pretty regular basis. I would say I'm still making 2 to 3 calls a day, and at this point it's my community. Yeah. I've got 4 or 5 guys who know my whole story, who know the things I struggle with on a day-to-day basis that I can call anytime. And I mean, that's almost unheard of, to just have like one dude that knows everything about you as a guy is like, I mean, you're the oddity, let alone like 4 or 5. So I can look back at my recovery story and I can see the good that came out of it. I wouldn't have had any of these things without facing my addiction. And it's not in spite of, I would say, it's literally because of. The triggers and urges, I would say, definitely let up. They're not as many. I still don't have internet on my phone, and I'm perfectly happy with it. It's like I've adapted. It's not a thing anymore. I do the work that I need to do online on a computer. It seems to be working, and I'm still willing if that started becoming a problem, well, I'll figure out how to live life without a computer. It's not so much avoiding or cutting out everything as just embracing who I can become as a person without my addiction.
Right. And what do I need to do in order to become that person? The vision of what my life could be like has drastically overshadowed the whole idea of, my life with the addiction.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is pretty much the extent of my story.
Josh, thank you. Thank you for coming and sharing this with me, with us. This has been an amazing journey. Thank you so much for your story. We appreciate you telling it, your willingness, honesty, open-mindedness to embrace change, embrace the pain. And I'm just so happy that, you've come out on the other side and you've found a new way of living that works for you without this old solution that you thought was going to be, the panacea, the snake oil, if you will, to, the cure-all, the thing that takes care of all of life's ills, which quickly turned into its own problem. Really appreciate your time, and thank you so much.
Yeah, man.
You've been listening to the Rocket Recovery Podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Catch up on our socials. We're on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube. Thank you again for supporting us. Please make sure that you subscribe, like, and share with all of your friends, all those that you know that need to hear this message of hope, recovery, joyfulness, freedom, abundance, clarity, all of the above. Thank you so much.